Everyone, and welcome to Greenlight Bookstore. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Great. I'm Josie. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager here at Greenlight, and I am so delighted to be here with you all tonight, hosting the one and only Robin McLean. Yes, that's where we cheer. Presenting her newest book, Get 'em Young, Treat 'em Tough, Tell 'em Nothing. Tonight's event will feature a special reading of the book by Dion, and then Robin will be talking with Anna Moschovakis, so you're in for an excellent evening. Before I turn things over to them, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you could turn off or silence your cell phones. Masks should be worn the whole time you're in this space unless you're up on stage. And we have signed books by both Robin and Anna for sale at the register tonight. But now on to the good stuff. Dion from HBO's The Wire will be performing tonight's reading. I'm going to turn this off. You can hear me. He also narrates the first 48 on A&E. An award-winning and critically acclaimed actor and narrator, he has performed on Broadway, off-Broadway, internationally, in films, and in several hit television series. From Baldwin to Eggers to Mosley to Sagan, his performances have been praised as thoughtful and compelling, vivid, and full of life. Our interviewer for this evening is Anna Moschovakis. Anna works with poetry and prose as a writer, editor, translator, publisher, teacher, and designer. Her most recent books are the English translation of David Diop's At Night All Blood is Black, the Belladonna Chaplet from Preliminary Notes on Risk, and the novel Participation, which we have up here as well. She was raised mostly in California and lives mostly in New York. She will be speaking tonight with our featured author, Robin McLean. McLean was first a lawyer and then a potter in the woods of Alaska before turning to writing. She's taught writing for a decade at Clark University, as well as at community literary centers across the US and world. She lives in the remote high plains desert of central Nevada with the wild horses, lizards, cactus, etc. Her new book, Get 'em Young, Treat 'em Tough, Tell 'em Nothing, is a dark and profane and hilarious, yet ultimately humane collection of stories reporting from the eternal battlefront that is the United States. Ranging across the continent, from Alaska to Missouri, from the flatlands to the mountains, each tale is a snapshot of the political, racial, and sexual undercurrents roiling contemporary life, and each finds a way into the nerves and blood that pulls beneath the question of how to live a decent life. Quite simply, McLean writes about disillusionment and enduring hope like no one else. So y'all are in for something really special tonight. Dion will be reading from Robin's book, then Anna and Robin will join them in conversation, and you'll have your chance to ask questions after that. So please, join me in welcoming to the stage, Robin, Anna, and Dion.
Where would you like to be? I know over here. Are you ready? Hello. How are you guys doing? Well, I'm going to open this up with a reading from Pterodactyl in his brilliant collection of words and thoughts and feelings. I don't think I'm going to explain anything except that all I want to say is that he was supposed to be picked up in the airport by somebody. Didn't quite happen like that. He climbed over the railing into the bushes, ran fast away, an anonymous informant. He rested behind a dumpster on the open field behind the apartment. Vegas was famous for such petty crime, a major stop in the artery of ugliness flowing north from Mexico to all down and out USA. Headlines were, of course, the tip of the iceberg, and petty civilians must occasionally transact with the evil. Macro meets micro. Tough love was tough. If the nephew was legit, Larry would bail him out in the morning. He'd be late, as usual, for conference registration at the Luxor. Cops have no interest in walkers. He took off walking, enjoying the night air. The grasses were really weeds, but he thought of the high plains where he and Larry had done their best digging before Charlotte, the toe joint of the Camarasaurus, is that right? Of the Camarasaurus, I did read this, an entire intact Ipsilophodon? Ipsilophodon. I read it a while ago. Ipsilophodon. He stumbled over a bag of trash, but ouch, it was just a stray cactus. He kicked the cactus away. This is what people did now. The cops flashed their magalites from the balcony into the grasses. Lithium, he guessed, since the beams turned the grasses blue. Pete crouched low and listened to the walkie-talkies talk fingerprints. His duffel sat in the nephew's trunk, his conference packet, his shaving kit. He felt for his wallet. He ran when the mag-light swung away. He crossed the street into an enormous parking lot. Cars filled it with cheers, smeared on back windows. Go Giants, go Gophers. He huddled behind a van and walked quickly to join a boys' soccer team herding through the aisles with families in tow. The athletes were still sweating from their game. He looked like any uncle or a coach in street clothes. Their bus idled with door open and lights on, and the group aimed for it. He spoke to the nearest kids about their victory, and they went on about their final goal. Nice passing tonight, Pete said to a kid at his elbow. Thanks, man, said the kid. I was on fire, all Hollywood. The group slowed for the police lights, blue and red across the street and open lot. Drug bust, desperate people. Let's go see. Now we want to eat tonight. But for Pete, from here, the lights looked like inconsequential sparks, and the open lot looked scrappy and much less vast. Pete peeled off from the team just before the bus. One kid followed, the Hollywood passer. The bus pulled away without them. When a cop car sirened by, the two dropped to the ground beside a wheel well. Hey man, the kid said. What are we doing? The kid was skinny with a buzz cut. In headlights, his lips were the color of cherry candy. Very thin, very dirty. Jeans, flannel, boots. A little payback, Pete said, eyeing him. A little fun. They walked for a while, Pete turning corners and the kid turning too, following. Cops after us? Said the kid after several blocks. Not even on their radar, Pete said. I'm all in, said the kid. Devotion forever. They walked flat, sandy right angles, cut the hypotenuse through more vacant lots. Right angles again, a few playgrounds. The houses were ranches with windows like faces, flat roofs, lawn art, and solar panels. Boulders were painted like turtles and ladybugs, and Pete said, why can't they leave rocks alone? I could use a fizzy drink, the kid said, sitting on a happy face. They stopped at a diner on a corner. The place was stucco and brick with big glass roll-up windows. Had at some time been a filling station. Got money? Said the kid. Pete slapped his back pocket. What do you think? He was happy. Larry would have to think hard about always being late. Flights, fishing, friendship. And now he could help a needy person. He liked contact with the younger generation. This kid would be his son's age. They sat in a booth by the window. The salt and pepper were in packets, and the kid tore them open and poured from the corners. He grabbed fried eggs with his face near the plate. He poured sugar direct to his tongue. Hungry, said Pete, and sipped beer, spectating. Extremely, said the kid. When his plate was clean, he went for a platter abandoned on the lunch counter. Crusts of grilled cheese, only the center's eaten out, a pile of fries zigzagged with ketchup, and half a sausage patty. He added salt. Where are your soccer clothes? Said Pete. Where are your cleats? I need to get to New York, said the kid. I was supposed to meet this friend at the airport. A pilot? Punctuality is a choice. Can you get me to New York? Larry screwed me over more than once. Screw Larry then, said the kid. The kid started in on grilled cheese, dipped the crusts into tiny jars of jam, arranged the different flavors around his plate. He dropped the extra jars in his pockets. Maybe Larry's sick, Pete said. He's not sick, said the kid. I can call him up, I guess, see what happened. Yeah, call the dick up. The kid ate French fries slowly, one at a time, licked his fingers between each, put his head down on the table to rest once, almost slept, sat up, groggy, looked around for the waitress, sipped his drink. He straightened up and got alert for the story Pete was telling about a fishing trip with Larry, the stolen fly on Madison, then mistaken slice with the fillet knife, which woke the kid up 100%. a finger, a clinic, and 3 forks. There are no mistakes. Oh, there are no mistakes. I learned that in reform school. Just kidding. Do you play soccer at all? I play all the time. Where are your parents? I just need you, Dad, to spot me some money. The system doesn't work like that. Why not? $100. When you beg, Pete said, you hand them power over everything. Them? Everyone but you. Fine, let them have it. You can't get to New York on $100. 200 then, perfect. I want things too, said Pete. I don't just get them. Why the hell not? The kid said. Pete didn't have an answer to that one. I'm a hypnotist, said the kid, swinging his fork back and forth in front of Pete's face. Spot the nice boy some cash. Be good to him. Pete ordered chocolate cake, and the kid gave a thumbs up. I see you have a hollow leg, Pete said. The kid lifted one leg high above the table. Hollow everything. He lifted the second leg, and the 2 legs can-canned together around overhead until the waitress yelled, cut it out, in the register. The boots were worn and cracked at the soles. No socks. The kid seemed drunk with food, a runt, delirious with calories and the fluorescent lights shining on his skin. The kid devoured the last of the sausage, dove into the cake when it arrived. You can also be a hypnotist, the kid said, and tick-tocked the fork in front of his own nose. If you hate Larry, I hate Larry. I don't hate Larry, but I don't say no to a little revenge. I hear you. Larry's always late, bossing people on the job like someone made a king, cheating in small ways. Who doesn't? He stole my girl, that's all, Pete said. I don't hate him in the least for doing that. I love Larry then, the kid said, licking the fork cross-eyed. I would suck Larry's dick if he were here right now. Pete ordered another beer. The kid ordered a refill. I could give you a 10, said Pete, when his phone settled. Not enough, said the kid. I'll go find Larry or some guy like him. Can we get off this broken record? Said Pete. The kid saluted. Anything for you, Captain. Thanks.
Nice job, Dion.
Nice job, Robin.
And how intriguing to start in the middle and leave us at the, I mean, that's really not the beginning, not the end. This story and that story exemplifies so much of what I love in this collection, actually. And I also don't want to spoil it, so I'm going to be very vague about those types of things. But maybe I'll begin with what was going to be a, well, first, I guess first I just want to say congratulations on the book, because it is like Pity the Beast, which was my introduction to your work, just completely addicting. I want to say that when I'm reading your fiction, I feel like I'm on a drug of language, and it really operates that way for me, and it has to do with this balance that you somehow manage to maintain in that's where you can never quite grasp where you are, or ever settle down completely into story or character or anything. So I kind of want to talk about that, or ask you about that in relation to dialogue, and especially since, you know, I just was listening to Dion reading Penny the Beast at the beginning of it, which, you know, so my entree into your work was through dialogue also in that way. And I wanted to ask you how you see dialogue, right? Because it is so, your dialogue strikes this balance, or not a balance, imbalance, this disequilibrium that's hallucinatory between sort of things people actually would say, and also a kind of very theatrical almost distillation, or it's very poetic in its way. So I'm just curious whether you have a thought about dialogue that you like to, or that you a way to articulate when you use it or what you want from it, or and then I'm also kind of curious if you've ever written a play, or or whether you what's the farthest you've ever gone with relying on dialogue as a way to tell a story, because of the way that the gaps seem to be kind of important to how you narrate.
That makes total sense. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. First of all, it's really thrilling to be here in the big city. And this story, of course, is my desert to New York story, because I live in Nevada currently and in the desert. And I wrote that story before I lived in Nevada. So there are no solar panels on the houses in Las Vegas. So I should have edited that out, which is really ridiculous.
Why not?
It's just super dumb.
But there might be next time.
It's super dumb, hopefully. Okay, so dialogue. This collection is really, really full of dialogue. I noticed that recently as I was starting to prepare to trot around the world, which is I'm going to be doing a bit. And it's a lot of dialogue between sparring people. I feel like it's got a sparring or battle sort of nature to it, and there's a lot of kids who argue. So the kid in this one, I'm not good at dialogue like that, so it's probably some kind of fantasy experience, because you can do it really, really slowly. And I know that with sometimes when I write dialogue, especially like in my novel where there's more characters, I'll try the dialogue line on for different characters. They'll all try it until I find who should get it. And that sort of guides the story a little bit. But I feel like one thing that I don't like in dialogue when I see it is dialogue that sort of guides the plot. You know, oh look, there's a spaceship, and I don't like that. I like the dialogue to be something other than what's actually happening. And I just have so much fun. Stephanie, my agent who's here, was reading that section out loud to me today, and I was just laughing at it, like enjoying.
But this is why I think it's really fun. I'm sure this also really bother you guys. But this is why I'll speak up. This is why I think it's really funny that you say like, oh, I don't write dialogue. I'm not good at writing dialogue. I'm like, that would be news to all of us.
No, I'm not good at dialogue. Like, I would never have a dialogue like that.
Oh, you mean in life?
Yeah, I write it all the time, but I would never have a dialogue like that. That's what I mean.
Got it.
Yeah, I guess that's what the poetic part of it, and it makes so much sense to me that you would try the lines on different characters, and that that reminds me of this thing that I saw in an interview with you, where you said something about how stories aren't about, your narrative isn't about plot or story, but stories. Something like a short story is a thought. And there was this idea that it's the thought that is the through line, and I feel that in what you just said about trying on, it's like that line needs to be said, that something in that needs to happen, but it's not necessarily character driven in the way we normally think of that. And then the characters come from the thought finding who to attach to, and then that seems to then go on, right?
Now I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately is, and I think it's partially because I live in places where there's more animals than humans. And if, we are narrative creatures, so story is to me mostly a human thing, although if you have a cat or a dog, you can see that they do sometimes make up stories, and you can see their story a little bit. But there's so many different ways that the world interacts with other beings than narrative. And so I've kind of been thinking about that a lot because I think of sort of narrative as a pathway between two spaces. But then if I were to say, okay, there's a pathway, but there's also a meadow, and then there's some horses in the meadow, and then there's like mountains beside the meadow. Like the narrative is just a thing straight down the middle, but that if you think of it as a thought, not as a story specifically, and the story might be part of the thought, then you get all kinds of other possibilities that can, if people will tolerate it, like if everyone's trying to fit the thing into only narrative, then if I go off on a crazy little, which I like to do, they'll say like, no. And so I feel like my readers are either people who will tolerate that or say, I really like that part, but when you went off on that crazy part, then that was not okay. But fortunately, I found some people who will tolerate my thoughts.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. And I mean, it makes me want to go into. It's so funny because I'm saying I totally overprepared. I have all these notes in here, but everything you're saying is reminding me of something that I noticed in there, and I'm just gonna bring it. But it reminds me of something about language and landscape and non-human. One of the main things I was thinking about here was about sort of like non-human languages and translation. But I'm gonna hold that for a second because, yeah, I wonder then. I mean, first of all, that question of, I've been reading other people's response to your work, and it is like a gift to be able to do a thing. I think there's a thing that you do where the story goes wonky, and destabilizing, and where it's like a litmus test, or not a litmus test, a Rorschach test for the reader, right? Am I going to go back and try and figure out, like, are we in real life or fantasy, or what's happening here, or what just happened, you know? And I think that there are many ways to enjoy that. So that's what's so great. I mean, some people might just be like, that's not for me. But there's a way to enjoy that that's like, it's a puzzle, I'm going to figure it out. And there's a way to enjoy it that's like, I'm just going to like be on the drug, which is sort of my way. And there's a way to sort of allow those moments, and it happens at the end of this story, I think is one of those moments, right, where, to me anyway, where the language then becomes this character in a way that frees expectations of what a story is going to do. And it's just constantly going back and forth. It's like there's times where you're like, oh, we're in the cafe, we're with these characters, they're talking, we totally get it, and we can like think about it in all these different ways that relate to sort of like life. And then there's places where you're like, that was a sentence, and that sentence is wild and is pointing in all these different directions, and I'm just gonna like pick one and go. I don't know if
That's why I love poets so much. Poets.
So,
yeah.
but I'm curious about I want to continue the non-human language thought and talk a little bit about place and about. I mean, here we are in New York City, and I think one of the things that I've always experienced as being a writer in any city, but especially in this one, is the barrage of human language that comes at you the minute you step out your door is so present, right? That it's like you're passively taking in human language all the time, and multiple human languages, ones that you know and that you don't know and that you sort of know, and that and you tend to live, I think, in places where probably when you walk out the door you are not being barraged immediately by human languages. And I think there's a kind of, there's a kind of question there for me about, I don't know, I came up with this analogy in my head that is it a little bit like when you're, say you're an English language writer who goes to live in a country where it's a language you don't know, in order to have a different relationship to your own language. Like there's all this other stuff happening and you know it's important and everyone's talking, but it's not my language, so that then makes you kind of take things in and try to work through them. Does non-human language like landscape, weather, animals, plants have that kind of relationship for, I mean, like how what's it like to be a person who's clearly so in your language head enough to make these exquisite and perfect stories, and yet to be sort of interfacing, if that's a verb, with patterns of nature, more maybe than like constantly taking in human language. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's,
And also what draws you to that way of living, I guess, is another.
yeah, I mean, I think you hopefully find a way to express yourself that feels interesting, and then maybe figure it out later. So I've been living in really, really remote places on purpose for all of my adult life, most, a few times diverging into urban-ish places. But I think you're attracted to ideas or landscapes or books or whatever. But to me, what has happened to me in places like that is you just see a different way of living. That's a kind of a simple way of saying it, but it's the human world is unimportant to those beings that are in fairly untouched ecosystems. And then you see, well, what are they thinking about? What are they thinking about, and can I interact with that? And then you got to figure out a way to translate that. I mean, you're a translator. You are also a translator, and I think it's important to translate that, because if you don't imagine that other space, then it basically doesn't exist in this power system that we live in, where humans are running everything and the other beings on the planet are not. If you do not acknowledge that that world is an intact system that does not care about us, then that meaning is lost. And so I'm trying to, it's not that I set out to do that, but I feel like it interrupts narrative so much that after a while you either stop it from interrupting narrative because you say, I'm not allowed to do that, or you do it anyway and try to find somebody who will publish it for me. But I want it to feel big. I want it to feel like the world that is beyond human. So, you can call it language, or you can call it sense of, it's not just language.
No, that was a metaphor in terms of patterns and systems and rhythms and some of the things that can start to make sense the more the things that can be learned, I guess. Maybe that's the relationship, from observation, or, so many of your characters knows a lot about, even tiny characters, like know about birds, or, or know about plants, or like facts about and those are systems of knowledge, that can be passed along, and I guess that's where the language metaphor comes in. But I think also, I think this, leads into a question, or two different questions that I had, or thoughts that I wanted to pose to you about insistence. Might be like the sort of general term, and one has to do with time, and how I think something that you just said about like it's a whole world, or something that the way that you dole out attention and time to events in the stories seems like it's really related to a kind of politics or poetics, or both. And what I mean by that is how much like a moment or an interaction with a plant or something gets to, how much space and time in the narrative that might get to take up for for a writer, but also like how much space a character gets to take up in our readers' time frame, right? Like these are often these are characters that are maybe not always that used to being looked at so much, right? And then we're looking at them very, very closely. I'm sorry, I just am having this like super vertigo right now, so it was just unusual for me, so I'm just letting you know.
You're bored.
Yeah, but it's not like I've never quite
Give me
had
the
this.
microphone.
Thank you. So some water if I fall over. Thank you so much.
Okay, so time.
Here, maybe?
It is hot
Here.
here. Shira.
Did you say do I need some beer?
Yeah.
It's, I'm
Open the
drunk in
door.
our language. It's really weird. It's like
I just want
I
you
just
to
had
keep
some
saying all
mussels.
those
Maybe
nice
there's
things.
something maybe I'll just keep rambling. Okay.
Drink more water.
Well, yeah, we're good.
Yeah, drink
I
water.
have some like herbs in there.
Water's the answer.
Continue.
And here's Robin McLean on time.
I mean, I'm interested in what you're saying about like dividing the character stuff, like how much sort of airtime people or objects get, and of course that is political. Like anyone who's ever been involved in any kind of campaign or something like that is all about like how do you get someone to pay attention to what you're doing, and really that's what we are doing as writers. Is someone submits to us and then we point their eyes to something and they have to look at it as long as you can keep their attention. And I'm just somebody who thinks the world is insane, like generally speaking insane, and looking at the wrong things, all like terribly, with terrible effect to what we are looking at all the time. And like I had some people visit last year and they were very upset about Facebook deplatforming one of their friends and how horrible the social media was. I'm like, stop going on there then. And they were like, well, I couldn't do that. And I said, well, you could do that. I mean, we choose what to look at. We choose what street to walk down, and we choose what people, what beings, what ideas to fill our minds with. And I'm pretty convinced that we are really spending too much time. So if in my stories I'm forcing the reader to look at something and they don't like that, that's probably like me giggling in the background or something like that. But I mean, I'm very, very worried about that kind of thing. I worry about that kind of stuff. So, and I think that whatever your concerns are, if you're writing well, they will filter through your work, no matter what the subject matter is, and that's really what you're doing. I mean, I don't really think, the kid in the cafe, it's, you just switch it and then that's what we're all trying to do with craft, is come up with a system that allows our self to filter through. As far as like big time, I mean, I live in a place, and I have lived in places where there's a geyser that I can see from the porch, and the geyser used to be part of the Yellowstone Formation, which is 1,000 miles to the north. So sort of you can say, I can see time. You can see it because the mountains, you know where Yellowstone is and how long it would take to get there. And when you can sort of feel time like that, there's an effect.
Yeah.
And I like that effect. And so I like to pass that forward.
And it's great to hear you talk about this. I had this thought that was sort of in the back of my mind as I was reading this set of stories in particular, which was about time and how it works in the narrative, in the attention sense, and also contemporaneity, and I think part of the insistence is that there's an insistence that this shoe is contemporary, like this shoe is now, and I think there's like it's so easy to conflate contemporaneity with urbanity and cosmopolitanism, and onlineness and technology, and so to see that there are like phones and things, they're not there, but they're just not where it's happening, feels like kind of cosmic in a way. I mean, it's connected to the non-human sort of pulsing that feels like it's kind of giving life to all the stories, even though they're so human and they're so much based in characters, which brings me to this other idea around insistence that I was thinking, which was, I just noticed, and I don't know if this is maybe me, because of course readers are going to bring a lot, like I said, to your Rorschach test. But yeah, but I feel like there's a repeated, in this set of stories, a repeated maybe motif or something of characters, maybe recognition and insistence on being recognized, and that comes over again. And I wonder whether, and to me that's one of the tender bits of the whole thing, is like a kind of, I mean, I'm thinking of the story. People are constantly trying to explain themselves to other people and say, don't make that mistake about me. I'm not that. I'm on your side, or these kinds of things, right? And you have such generosity toward that desire, I think. And I wonder whether it made me come up, or maybe want to phrase a question like, what are other people for, in a way? Because I think some of these stories beg the question, like, what are other people for? People are staying in relationships that seem complicated and not always great. Power structures are all messed up, and yet there's like people finding the power that they can within whatever interpersonal situations they're in. So is like, what are other people for? One of your questions.
Wow, that is a new one. I don't know.
Or yeah, I don't know.
I can't believe you the answer to that.
I don't know that one.
There's it. What's that?
There's a section here that answers it
Oh, great.
this way.
Alright, which one is that one?
Consider this too, we are each separate little dinghies, all
Oh,
floating
yeah,
along
that's
but
a good
together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, well,
Do you want to read that?
or
What, from Pity the
I
Beast?
don't know. You can do that.
I'll do whatever you would like to read.
It gets really dark though. It starts good, but then it gets kind of dark.
It's just there to there,
Where did it
Yeah.
start? Here?
just here,
Yeah.
to ends on Lone Wolf.
So I'll just say this book is a Western, and it's
Is it
peop-
though?
It is.
It takes place in the West.
There's some horses in it. The people get in worse and worse and worse and worse trouble, and that this section is one of the characters trying to philosophize a little bit about how you deal with terrible calamity in a society, in a little society.
Who's talking? You remember who's talking?
I do. That is Saul.
All right. Oh, yeah, okay. Consider this too. We are each separate little dinghies, all floating alone but together, all caught in the same currents in the same ocean, a human lifetime. I'm back on the grand scale here. We must stick together in the terrible and mighty currents, in calm and storm. In the sun of noon and cold of night, we must hold on to each other. Whatever height of waves or depth of water, whatever creature bumps over over hulls, whatever winged beast careens, we must bind together to arrive at the shores we seek together. This is a serious and dangerous duty. In the great struggles of history, many have died for the good of the many, for the right. We must grip each other's bows and gunwales, make webs of boats, a raft. We must tie about knots, tie stout knots. And if one boat is taken by a wave, if it drifts too far from the raft, we must fling ourselves across the widening gap to it, lean out over the deep, grip its oar, haul in, and we do. By God, swim if you must. Ropes, yes, when the distance is too far for swimming, or when the sea is rough or swirling with eels. Tender, some people, some simple thanks to God, it's not you drifting, not yet. will be someday. Stupidity can be the cause, yes, and laziness too, or selfishness. But drifts are blameless, innocent, and pure, provoked by unseen forces, winds, subsurface events, acts of God we cannot comprehend, unavoidable, even given best intentions. We are honor-bound to give aid. But the straying mariner is honor-bound also. His duty is to offer an oar across the gap, to catch hold of the rope thrown to him, to pull back to the boats with all his might, to make the greatest effort to save himself, to paddle, to swim, to haul his craft back through the waves. In short, he is honor-bound to save himself. His life is borrowed property while he lives it, and so must be preserved. The duty of each boat is equal and opposite and reciprocal. But even assuming all duties are discharged on either side, here is a third case to consider. If the big raft can't reach the wandering dinghy in time, despite its best efforts, if the boat adrift can't be caught, if the vanishing mariner can't save himself back due to injury or confusion or a rogue wave rolling in, if a terrible fluke of this kind should occur, and there's no changing it, well then, and only then, is the raft released from the duty to the departed. There and then, the duty shifts from the duty to the safety and survival of the majority. What I mean is, there are limited cases that can arise and necessarily alter the laws governing acceptable human behavior. When it's life and death, it's clear as clear. But Jenny, I see now, is not to be filed under this header. She belongs to the fourth case. And the unmoored dinghy not only refuses, but impairs assistance, imperiling the flotilla, so urgently trying to help its captain. Well, in that instance, the duty to rescue is inverted. The rules of the lone wolf Such a great book, just want to say.
Well, yeah, now that that book has been brought in, can we ask you about the relationship between the books? I was going to ask you what was coming next, but I was also curious how the one maybe moved to the other, or maybe it wasn't so simple. And yeah, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how the history.
Wait, before you answer that,
Yeah.
for people who don't know, that was her brother-in-law speaking. Jenny's brother-in-law.
That's good clarification. Okay, so I was a pretty much straightforward short story person, and my first collection came out in 2015, and I started a new story after that, and it was a long short story, and it was the beginning of that book. It was the first story in the next collection, and then I sort of decided to keep going with it, but I didn't really know how to write a novel. I had no idea how to write a novel. Everybody wants you to write one. Of course, if you guys write short stories, you know everyone's always asking you for one of those novels. And so I decided to proceed. It was about 50 pages long. The first 50 pages of Pit of the Beast was a short story. And so I didn't know how to do it, and so I did what everyone would do in a case like that, is I wrote another short story collection, which is Get 'Em Young, Trim Top, and I think of all these stories in the collection as little problems. They're a puzzle that you have to figure out how to solve, and which each one that you solve, you learn some new skill, basically, and I think I needed some more skills to write the novel, and so I know my brain was working on the novel while the stories were happening, and then I pulled the first story out and wrote the novel. So that's how that happened.
So they're really
They're very-
tied.
yep.
They're like co-equal. We are going to invite some questions in a second. I wanted to ask one more question around how projects begin and move forward, because I'm sure you're working on new things. But also, what you just said reminded me, I mean, I have this kind of theory that everything we write knows something that we don't know yet, and we write it to find out, and then you know, have to move on to the next unknown thing that our work can tell us. I don't know whether that rings true for you, but I just received another piece from Dion Brand, the author. I got to hear her speak the other day, and she said this amazing thing, which was every piece, every poem or every book or every project that feels complete, there's a failure in it. She said, I always know where it is. I know which line it is. And she said, other people might not know, but I know. And then what I took from it, and forgive me if I'm misquoting Ms. Brown, who's a genius, but it seemed like she was saying, and that's where the next piece comes from, you know, like that, because you still have to let go of it, right? You can't. And I wonder if any of that, or I'm just curious what you're going to go to next, but I'm wondering whether sort of in the answering a question forms too, and whether you have an idea of how the next thing gets born now for you. Maybe you've already finished the next thing.
No, I haven't, but I'm working on kind of multiple things, and I feel like I learned a lot from these two books together, and a lot of it has to do with the shape of the story, that why are these things, and the idea of you know, they're pretty surprising to me, and so I kind of think of it more like, I hope that my next project is more surprising to me than these. And I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea whether, you never know, at least I don't, if you ever will be able to write another thing, for sure. And it's kind of scary to me. And this has been a super weird year for me for a lot of reasons. And it's been so disruptive, and so I haven't been writing a lot, like more in and out of it. And I feel in some ways sometimes life will jostle you around so much, and something new comes out because of that. I hope that's what happens. Very much. I hope that's what happens. Is that, I don't know.
Does anyone out there have any questions for?
I'd like to hear a little bit about the process of taking the short story and turning it into these, like you said, if you could talk about that. Like, did you outline, or like how'd you do that?
Okay, so there was a really big problem for me about, first of all, if you write short fiction, you always are trying to make it smaller and tighter and tighter and tighter, and the idea of making something bigger was a very, very problematic for me, kind of on a visceral level, like almost like a muscle memory. You know, if you do something, you know, enough times, to shift that is really difficult. And I remember asking Karen Shepard, who encouraged me to keep going with this, well, what if you put in like more than you need, and is that okay? And she's like, yeah, you can. It's like very, very uncomfortable. But the main problem with that story is that if you're familiar with the story at all, the first 50 pages are extremely, extremely dramatic. And if you were to map the dramatic sweep of it, it goes like this in 50 pages, and it ends up here at the very dramatic moment, at least in the original story. And you cannot keep doing that to somebody for a whole novel. Like, they'll jump off a book bridge, like they won't do it. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mean, it'd be like being on a motorcycle ride for too long. And so I had to think, okay, how do you flatten it out without flattening it out too much? And then but the story itself, fortunately, I had written kind of a really, really bad synopsis for it. And then I realized, well, somebody told me it was a really bad synopsis. And then I just said, okay, thank you. And I made it a super, super simple story. So it's a bad act, like a community eruption, a bad act, and a chase, which is a very traditional Western story. And so then that helped me figure out how to kind of pace it so that I could take a break after that and then, make a shape that would hopefully work out. And then in the course of writing it, I had a lot of these interrupting thoughts that I had a war with them. And the whole writing process was about whether I would accept them or not, and I did. And which was, kind of for me was like, well, if I'm doing this, then I'm doing it for me, because there's a very good chance that no one will tolerate this except for me. And I had to decide to do that, and I did. And so I will never go back from that. I know that as a person, I will never go back from that. So that's very exciting to me. So if you think about a book or a thought or a story as an experience for you, which is how I think of it, I'm in a really exciting place with that, and it's scary also. So, I don't know, does that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Rob, go
Nice.
team.
Yeah, I'm always curious about, just because like a collection of stories is like a book of poems, in that like you've got to decide, you've got all these poems or you've got all these stories, and then you've got to figure out, what order do I put them in? And then how do I get the stories talking to each other? So I'm just curious about your new book. How did you decide the order and like, and like the entry and the exit for your readers?
Well, I believe that's really, really important. And with my first collection, I changed the order like 1 or 2 stories and went from getting finalists to winning a prize. So I think it is so, so important what you're talking about. And the stories in the collection are, a lot of them I think are really, really funny. Like this one, I think it's twisted, but I think it's really funny. And some of them are not funny. Like the first story, somebody told me last night that parts of the first story are funny, and I've never heard that. To me, it's called "But for Her Hitler." I don't think it's funny, and so there's, and so, but it's a very. So like if somebody starts this collection with "But for Her Hitler," then they might think that this is not a funny collection, and then they get to Pterodactyl, and there's this crazy kid, and it gets funnier, I think. And but I think you just have to sort of think of it as almost like an album if you're a musician, and you want to, of course, pick something that has the greatest chance of captivating. And so, But for Her Hitler, it's a provoking title. I have a lot of provoking titles. I'm really into provoking titles. And moving between maybe the melancholy and the funny. And cross your fingers and ask your friends and tell them to tell you the truth. And there was a story in front of But for Her Hitler, but actually we took that story out. So, but I think you should really think about the hard and experiment and give it to people and think of it like music.
Did you, I'm curious what the last story that you wrote in this collection is, and whether it's the last one in the collection, and also, whether you have that experience, because I think about this too as a poet, like there's often a missing piece. It was true when I wrote a novel too, there was like a missing piece, and so it's like you write, and then sometimes you have to wait for the missing piece.
Oh, yeah.
To like show up, and then you're like, okay, that's it.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
gonna be
no,
the
I
end.
have
Or
one like that.
maybe it's not the last line,
Yeah.
but it's the missing piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the first story in this collection took me 8 years. I did an MFA at UMass Amherst, and I had been writing a story when I was in Alaska, and I went back to UMass, and I went to my first class, and of course, all the people in the class are like little kids compared to me, and I signed up to be the first one, and I turned in the story, and it was just ripped to shreds by the workshop. They didn't get past the first paragraph. It was horrible, and I cried, and it was horrible. And I said, I will never look at that story again. That is the worst story in the world. I hate it, hate it, hate it. And then 5 years went by, and I was like, well, maybe. And then I went back, and it was 28 pages, and I cut it to 6. I added 7, and it still was not right. But then I left it. And then about 3 years later, I was visiting with a friend, and he had his girlfriend, and she was talking about a grandmother that had lived in Vienna through World War II, and a Holocaust survivor, and whatever. It has kind of nothing to do, apparently, with the story, but that information immediately, I knew I would finish the story then. So that one took me a long time. I don't know if it was actually the last one, because you're working on them at different times, and I workshop them all. I am a huge fan of getting smart people to, be rigorous with your work, and so I workshop them all. Hannah's here. She helped me with several of the stories in this collection, and yeah, you have to wait for it. And nobody thinks you should have to do that for a short story, but to me, short stories are little sculptures or gems, and they have to be more perfect in a way than anything else.
Any other last questions? I think we've got one more question.
Oh, we have time for one more.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, here.
I was thinking about what you were saying and blocking out maybe news, social media, this and that. I was curious, when you're writing, do you read other writers, or do you kind of go on a strict diet of not looking at other writers?
I try to read all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I also like to look at artwork. So I collect postcards, and I have postcards all over the wall right in front of me, no matter where I am. And but I think there's so many people who are writing stuff that blows my mind, and I think it's helpful to have your mind blown while you're working. If I'm really, really towards the ends of something where I'm working a lot, then I might not, but I try to read a lot. Yeah.
Did you want to ask?
A short one. I just was going to say, the collection is how I fell in love with Robin's writing when we met in 2016, and I just love the language for the propulsion and the beauty and the gorgeousness that just carries you. But what I also love, I mean, there's a lot of dark humor and wry humor, but it is this really interesting investigation in a way of America, and it does get to it goes to a lot of places that a lot of others don't go to. And I think it's because you're not living in a coastal bubble, but I also think you have empathy for your characters even when they're morally compromised, or there are a lot of scammers. We talked about this. There's a base note of predation, the predatory aspects of American culture, of empire, of people trying to grift, off each other, partially because they're down and out themselves and on the fringes, but there's still a sense of glee, and I know it has to do with also complicated feelings you have about America, like this love aspect, but then also the dark, complex history, and that there's a lot of resonance with American history throughout the collection and the stories that I also love. It's like a little thread pulling through, like that the characters themselves are interacting, like going to the what is it, the Abraham Lincoln?
Abe's cabin.
Abe's cabin, sorry.
With the little, like the arm hanging down from the
Yeah.
left.
Well, I'm very, very, I just think everybody should, especially people like on the left, because I'm on the left of patriot, like I love the United States and I have a big problem with the United States. Like I have very, very I'm a critic of the United States also, but I've lived in places where I have to engage with, I've chosen to engage with people mostly who I don't agree with politically. And you know, you go like back when I lived in Alaska, you know, you go to the laundromat and it says, remove the pens and bullets from your clothing before you wash your stuff. Or, you know, you can't go into the state fair with dogs or knives. Like it just cracks me up. But I love those places, and so I feel like the stories are an investigation for me of the push and pull you feeling that I have as an American right now, or maybe always, because I mean I kind of think, you know, if you go to Las Vegas, just go hang out in Las Vegas, and to me that is a manifestation of the American psyche, and that is not a good picture, but it really is. I mean, scamming and it's part of who we are, and it's kind of funny. Yeah, I think that's.
Thank you.
Can we all give it up one more time for Robin? Thank you so much for your time tonight, for being here, and for this wonderful conversation. And thank you all for showing up. Year after year now, Robin's books have been my favorite books of the year, and I am positive they'll be yours too. We have signed copy of Anna and Robin's books for sale tonight. And thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.